Today, I want to talk about the very delicate subject of is it ever okay to talk about celebrity bodies, as well as Lizzo's recent take on Substack about her experience as a body positive influencer who has lost weight. Let's talk about it. It is a battlefield out there right now with the recent uptick in discussions about celebrity bodies. It's not just one celebrity or another, it's not just one movie or another. It's a widespread phenomenon of increasing amounts of conversation on social media around women shrinking, celebrities shrinking, due to the speculation of celebrities being on GLP-1 medications or whatever the reason is. Before GLP-1s came on the scene, this has been going on for a long time. Any time that a celebrity loses a significant amount of weight, especially in the past 5 years since the rise of the body positive movement, there is an explosion of split groups of people who defend and criticize. It has given rise to a whole new conversation, not about the criticism or the defense, but about the actual conversation at large. And is it ever okay for us to be having these conversations? I want to first talk about where the criticism of having the conversations comes from. And it's based on this idea that we should not ever talk about people's bodies. On the surface, it seems obvious, although it isn't to everybody. And as somebody who has, absolutely, I feel very deeply about not talking about people's bodies. Long before this was a conversation, I'm sure many of you can relate to this. Anytime somebody ever commented on my body, positive or negative, or even neutral, I resented it. I did not like it ever because it felt like I was being exposed. It felt like I was being assessed. It didn't matter which way you talked about it. It would always feel to me like an expectation that I had to uphold or rebel against, or a judgment, or there was always something about having my body spoken about that never sat right with me. And as somebody who works with individuals who deal with this, who also feel that way, who don't want their bodies discussed, I am a fierce advocate for not talking about people's bodies. However, I think that there is a difference between talking about people's bodies on the individual level, and I'll explain what I mean by that, versus having conversations about bodies represented at times by individuals in the media. And this is exactly what I want to start to deconstruct a little bit. But first, let's talk about why we don't talk about people's bodies at the individual level and what that even means. So, when I, for example, walk into a room and if I see somebody that I know who has lost any amount of weight, it could be a significant amount or anything, I do not say a word. I do not congratulate them. I do not ask them what happened. I do not even make reference to the fact that I noticed. This is for many reasons, one of which is because of what I mentioned earlier, that to comment on a person's body is very personal and it can potentially trigger somebody into a whole host of responses that we don't, quote unquote, intend to happen, but that do happen. Now, that's actually not my main reason for not saying anything. My main reason for not saying anything is because I abhor this idea that we congratulate weight loss and the system that that represents, the diet culture value that that represents when we see someone who's lost weight and we congratulate them is in direct opposition to my values, and I will not uphold it. So my mother, for example, can't understand this. She thinks that if you're complimenting somebody, you're complimenting somebody. And that she kind of gets a little exasperated at me for being such a stickler about this. I know this to be a pervasive thought, mostly I think among people who've never struggled with this kind of thing and don't really have body image issues, or who are so indoctrinated into the idea that it's better to be smaller that they can't even see why that would be an issue. When we compliment people's weight loss, we are affirming that it is good, that weight loss is good. And some people may think, well, isn't it? And that's the problem, is that we assume that it is. We don't question that. It's such a given in our culture that it's confusing, really, to hear somebody say, like, why would you not congratulate or compliment somebody for losing weight when it is, in fact, good? For anyone trying to deconstruct diet culture and fat phobia, we aren't looking at weight loss as a gold standard. Weight loss isn't a personality trait. Weight loss isn't something that makes a person valuable, but it is one of the most frequent compliments I think people receive. because we aren't in the practice of going around and naming qualities we like about somebody. We're a culture that observes how people look, how things look. We're aesthetics first. And to be fair, that is what we see first. That is what we get to know first. But when you take that practical truth and combine it with the relentlessness of weight loss as a value, all we end up doing to one another is reinforcing that that's what people are looking at and that's what people value. And if you aren't doing that thing, and if you haven't lost weight, or God forbid you've gained it, you know you're not going to receive that compliment. I have a family member who is so very driven by diet culture, and she's in the boomer generation. And so this is also part and parcel of that generation. When I asked her not to comment on my body, because at a certain period of time in recovery, I lost a little bit of weight. And she came up to me, and this is after having recovered, right? So I had this period of weight gain. And she came up to me at a holiday event and she said, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. You look really good. Now, I'd been told that exact same thing during times when I was not doing anything I should have kept doing. This is another reason why we don't say things like this. I have been told that I looked great and to keep doing what I'm doing, even when I was very sick with symptoms of Lyme disease and was not able to eat because I was under such an amount of stress and so terrified of a diagnosis I had not yet received. And I had named that to somebody and they said, well, it doesn't matter, just keep doing what you're doing. So this whole idea of like, at all costs, whether or not you're sick, keep doing what you're doing. That's how much we value weight loss in this world, is representative of the dysfunction. But I digressed again. So when I lost some weight incidentally in recovery, and this person had complimented me on it, and I just was kind of like, I'd rather you not talk about my body. And she told me that she didn't care what I wanted. She was going to compliment me anyway. She thought she thought I was being humble. And I wasn't. I was being like serious, like, don't do this. It doesn't help me. It's actually in so many ways harmful. I say all this to reiterate that speaking about people's bodies is not something that I agree with. It's not something that I do. It's something that I actively don't do. Understanding the depths of eating issues and body image issues, helps us understand why, in fact, speaking about people's bodies when we don't know what they're going through, and that it supports a value system that is actively oppressing us all the time. It becomes clear why we don't want to talk about individuals' bodies. Okay, so we've established this, right? But what about celebrities? Okay, so this is what's happening now, where there are a lot of celebrities that are losing weight at significant levels. And there is social media commentary up the wazoo. And if you are in any way immersed in accounts of body neutral or body positive or food dysfunction spaces, where there are voices out there that are really condemning the commenting on this, like, right, which is happening all over the place. So for some reason, whenever I go on Facebook, I see this the most. I see headlines, right? So it's also being capitalized on by the media, which is, there's so many better things for us to be talking about and reading about, but it's certainly being propagated there. And I see every day at least 3 or 4 news media outlets with before and after pictures, or a picture of a celebrity who has clearly lost weight with a headline about that weight loss. And every time there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of comments from the peanut gallery about it. And you can pretty much go into that 50-50 split. There's going to be the people who are saying, I don't know what happened to her. She's clearly on a weight loss drug, which, by the way, is an interesting accusation, because I think some people just admit it, but it's its own kind of accusation. I'm concerned for her. She really needs to eat a hamburger. Like, it runs the gamut, right? So you're going to find contrarian or critical opinions or judgmental opinions. And even those are really widely varied in terms of like empathy coming through, or is it blatant criticism? And sometimes it's just mean-spirited comments in there. And then you've got the opposing side, which are the people saying, who cares? She looks great. Leave her alone. Don't talk about people's bodies. We don't know what she's going through. Good for her. I don't know what you're so upset about. She's healthy and looks great now. I mean, again, same thing. On the opposite side, you've got a spectrum of people championing the weight loss and endorsing it as a positive thing, all the way through just saying, like, why are we talking about people's bodies? Don't do it. And on this point, it branches off into a few different sections. So, the way I see it, and that's really what I'm presenting here, and we can have a discussion about this, but the way that I look at it is where you see comments like, she needs to eat a hamburger, or she looks disgusting, or mean spirited, like derogatory, almost like meant to be hurtful kind of comments like that. There is no part of me that has any confusion about, is that right or wrong? It's wrong. It feels gossipy. It feels mean girl. It feels like it's not coming from any kind of helpful place. It just feels like a very defensive reaction. And I guess the issue, even more so than it being defensive, because we all have defensive reactions, but that it wasn't checked or noticed enough to delete it. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be intending to put something in a place when you hit publish on your comment. We all have defensive reactions to things. When you put that out in the world and agree to do that, and you're like, yeah, I'm standing by that. This is what I'm meaning to do. There's something conscious about that implies to me a lack of self-awareness. I do believe that I think sometimes we can imagine where that comes from, right? Like, I know that I sometimes have reactions of jealousy. I have had very reactive jealousy experiences that bring me to think things that I wouldn't, in my values minded self, want to be thinking, or I don't want to be feeling that way, right? And I am a big advocate of, it's okay to have a human reaction, but it becomes a different thing when we post that. And so, for anybody who is vilifying somebody for their body and commenting on it in a way that is meant to be hurtful, or is not considering the hurtfulness that may be embedded there, I land on the side of that's harmful, and I don't agree with that. Now, based on what I said earlier, I also have feelings about the advocates, right, who are like, she just looks great. She looks better than she's ever looked. People who are really championing the weight loss in a defense. Many times, it almost seems like more like the people commenting are starting to get in wars with themselves. It's less about the picture at that point and more about infighting. So sometimes the commentaries back will kind of be like, if somebody says she needs to eat somebody else says, she looks awesome, you're just jealous, right? I don't agree with that either. And it's still talking about people's bodies. I understand the defense of trying to say, like, don't be mean. Here's a compliment, but it's still upholding the value system that because she lost weight, she looks great. On one hand, I don't agree with being mean and cruel for obvious reasons, but I also don't agree with upholding the congratulations. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with the neutral, right? Like the people who are saying, who cares? Like, just stop talking about it. Just stop talking about it. And this is where there's been an uptick in what I've seen in my own algorithm from influencers and educators and therapists who are speaking out against any discussion of this subject at all. So these are going to be the ones who represent the people saying, stop fighting about it's good or it's bad. Just stop talking about it altogether. Now, because I do what I do, and because I believe what I believe, and because I advocate for what I advocate for, I guess if I didn't know myself, I would think, okay, that's probably where you would land, Steph. Like, that neutrality place is where you would land. And when it comes to individuals, I do. I think it is much more productive if you are in a person-to-person situation in your day-to-day life, people you know, people you work with, your family members, to just say nothing when it comes to people's bodies. I am 100% behind that. I do not waver here. However, I also do not believe, and this is where I've been departing from a lot of the people I would consider like colleagues on social media who speak about things and have the same values that I do. But I'm noticing that the encouragement is to say nothing at all in any context. I think we need to differentiate between what context we're talking about. Last year, around this time, I posted about a celebrity who was in the media at the time for having lost a significant amount of weight and being the star of a show for young people. And I spoke to this in terms of highlighting that the media has been pushing smaller and smaller and smaller bodies in degrees that are working backwards away from what the body positive movement was doing for body diversity in the media. And using that example, which was at the time one among many, it's always one among many. There's never just one instance of this going on. We know that the media at large, we know that television actresses and movie actresses, models, like it's at large, there is an extremely, extremely disproportionate amount of body diversity. I go to the mall with my daughters begrudgingly now. I've avoided malls for so long until I had daughters, and now that's all they want to do. And I am once again bombarded with the imagery and the mannequins of impossibly small standards. And while there are some stores that will represent bigger bodied mannequins, it's, again, extremely disproportionate. My post at this time last year was to highlight what I was picking up on more and more and more as we were moving away from body diversity and into more heroin chic, to say that symbolically, this actress was one among many of, and it's the symbolism, right? It's that this is a representation of something going on at large that I am naming about the media being a source of the dysfunction, a source of the oppression. And that I remember as a young person being, I can't tell you the influence that the media had on me from a very young age. I remember reading a magazine I must have been under 6 years old, because I remember reading it in the room that became my sister's, but we shared it at the time. And seeing these four women, if anybody ever finds this, like I just would love to know what magazine it was in. I mean, there's no archive of it because we didn't have the internet, but it was these four women, and they were all in silver dresses, like metallic dresses. And they must have all been late teens or early 20s. And their hair was done. It was like 80s. It was like the 80s. It was the 80s. And I mean, now I know they were obviously airbrushed or something. I mean, it was just, and they had these perfect, perfect bodies. And I remember being enamored with them. I would just stare at these women. And I remember, without having the words for it at the time, I remember the way it felt. Like I remember feeling it was this mixture of like envy. Like I was just so desiring their beauty and awe for how beautiful they were. And I know, I can feel it, that I internalized at least at that moment. If that was the first time, I don't know, but that's what women looked like or should look like, or that I wanted to look like. And that continued forever. 17 magazine. Remember Nikki, what was her name? Nikki Taylor. And she had a sister too. Anyway, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you'll remember. And I just remember idolizing this. I remember looking at these magazines and the visceral ingestion of these images as what I assumed I needed to be. Now, does that mean that every child, every young girl looks at the media and ingests that information? No, I don't think that I am a representation of everybody. I do believe I am a representation at some spectrum of everybody. I do believe that everybody who sees this media imagery enough is absolutely getting impacted by it. How impacted is going to vary. But the vulnerability of somebody who has body image insecurity or who doesn't match those standards, which I never would, is more likely to be harmed by it. Hence why I care about it. I also have 3 daughters. I care about this. This matters to me. I understand the vulnerability here. And so going through, even when I was shopping at Abercrombie and Fitch and feeling like there was a time where I outgrew that store. I wasn't able to fit in those clothes, and I couldn't do what my friends were doing. I couldn't shop at that store, and that store was such an icon at the time. The bags of the models on them, like, this impacted me beyond the shadow of a doubt. This contributed to my body image being as awful as it was. Yes, I had my own stuff going on, but the media is a huge part of this. I have no part of me that believes that the media wasn't indirectly, partially responsible for how I saw myself, and probably continue to see myself in some recesses of my brain. We know that a person will consider normal, quote unquote, to be what they see the most often and what their peers celebrate the most. The media has a huge part in our body image, whether or not we're conscious of that. Imagery bypasses logic. It goes into parts of our nervous system that integrate information below the level of consciousness. I am a fervent critic of the media and the way that they make this all very hard for us. And so a year ago, I posted about this, and I got upset at the ways in which my kids, my 3 daughters, were watching this movie and were witnessing on screen an actress that they had known before she had lost the weight. They knew her from a different show. And again, even as I talk about it, I'm aware that I'm not naming names. And there's something about that that even feels really passive aggressive. I don't want to explicitly name her because it really isn't about her. It really isn't. It's never about one person. It's always about the epidemic. And speaking about this through the lens of a social epidemic is a different thing than speaking about an individual. So I put this post out to do this. It was not shameful commentary on her. It was saying, this is a symbol of what is going on. This is happening. This is a trending conversation. It is something everybody's talking about. It offers us a forum to discuss something we all can relate to, we can all have context for, to name a cultural phenomenon happening that I believe very strongly about and is part of my advocacy platform. And there were people who, again, I really respect their work, who had a problem with that post. And it became a conversation about, like, say what you got to say, but don't name names. Okay. I sat with that. I really struggled with that at the time. I felt like I'd done something wrong. I really went into a bit of a shamey place about, oh my goodness, should I not have done that? Is that everything I am against? I questioned this a lot. I went back and forth with it. I came back around to it this year because it came up again. It's coming up so much right now. And while I have not at any point in my recent social media posts or essays spoken directly of a specific person in the media or a specific actor, a specific celebrity, I disagree with the idea that, number one, we can't talk about this. And number two, even that we can't talk about it and reference the symbols from which it comes. So what I mean by that is, when we take a celebrity and criticize the celebrity in the way that I described on the Facebook comments earlier, that is at the individual level. When we take a celebrity, which unfortunately, the nature of being a celebrity is that you are also going to be a symbol. It's as true as the grass is green. When you have enough exposure, you become a symbol of something. A celebrity is going to, by affiliation of the movies they act in or the way that they're depicted by their manager and their branding and all of that, like, they become a symbol. Not only are they a symbol, but they are also influential. So a celebrity is somebody that the people know and emulate and look up to, even if, again, not consciously necessarily, but they depict that idea of what people are, what people look like. The validation of a celebrity through just the exposure we get of them, the repetitive nature of how often we see them, we understand them, we know things about them. There is, again, something going on in our subconscious there that's saying this person's a representative of the culture or of what the culture aspires to be. Celebrities they make up the media imagery. And so the disproportionate amount of the bodies that exist, most bodies in celebrity culture are small. They're quite small. Even if there's exceptions here and there, it's not the same. The majority, the dominant imagery is one note. As those celebrities shrink, that is going to have a ripple effect down. It's going to impact me and you, and it's going to impact my kids and yours. And because of that, they're not just an individual. They're an individual all by themselves, but they are also a symbol. And that is what it means to be a celebrity. If we ignore what's going on and we don't talk about what's going on in celebrity culture because we're afraid to offend somebody at the individual level, we are not paying attention to them at the symbolic level, and we're not considering all the damage that happens there. We're very eager to protect the individual, and this isn't an individual problem. This is a larger problem. You don't have to talk about just one person. We can talk about this at large. But in protecting the individual by not naming this, you hurt everybody else who's impacted by it. If we say nothing, it's essentially canceling a version of advocacy. It's canceling an advocacy platform here. Now, somebody came into a comment. Actually, I don't know if it was on my page or it was somebody else who was getting criticized for naming this. And the person's argument was, you can talk about it without naming the person. My daughter's in 6th grade and she's learning to write argumentative and persuasive essays. And middle school English class 101 will tell you that you need to insert details into your arguments. For us to say, the media is impacting our body image because women are getting smaller. Yeah, that sounds like that's not going to go very far. There's context to understanding what's happening. It's very difficult to talk about something without talking about the very things that make up that something. You risk flattening the entire discussion by avoiding the details of the discussion. I am not advocating for taking a celebrity and making her the central argument of your essay to advocate for a cause that could easily be generalized to lots of different celebrities. But what I am saying is that when you've got active conversations going on in society that everybody can use as a reference point for what we're talking about, it feels almost passive aggressive not to. It feels like we're trying too hard to dance around a subject that everybody knows anyway. I have now talked for however long I've been talking for without naming anybody. I also think that if you mention a name to give a conversation context, you are talking about a symbolic representation and not attacking an individual. The other argument that comes up here is, well, if we talked about people's bodies on the opposite side of the spectrum and we talked about it from the point of view of being too big, then the body positive community would riot. And that why is it okay to talk about people who are at the extreme end of thinness if it's not okay to talk about people who are at the extreme end of bigness and call it a problem too? This is an argument I'm happy to deconstruct for you. In no world is there ever a situation where there is not a pathology of bigness. On this planet, there is no shortage of pathologizing bigness. That's happening. That's been happening. There is nobody who's going to argue that. Being even a little bit big is pathologized. Once you pass a certain size in this, even in straight size, you start to have to apologize for it. I mean, this is something that's so it's not even a question. This is a call to say we are idolizing and we are elevating thinness. We're not doing that on the other side. There are no weight loss drugs that people are racing to get to make oneself gain weight. There is a drug that people are racing to the degree that even straight size people are looking to get even smaller, to elevate themselves to that status of very, very small. This is an unequal playing field. The idea that this is some kind of a double standard is thrown on its head when we realize that a double standard requires there to be equal circumstances on both sides of an equation where one of those sides gets a pass for something and the other doesn't. We are talking about inequity. We're not talking about a level playing field where one is getting something and the other isn't. There's a problem in our system of inequity so large, the gap is so large, that the idea that you would compare trying to decrease weight stigma on the side of big to trying to find more privilege on the side that already has an inordinate amount of it reflects something of the ego going on there. If you are protecting thinness because you don't like protecting bigness, there is something inside of you on the individual level that you are protecting, because poking holes in the ideal must somehow be jeopardizing and threatening to your status quo. Until we have more of an equal footing between thinness and bigness, this is a social justice issue, not a hypocrisy issue, not a double standard. Okay, I wanted to talk about the last thing, which is Lizzo's recent essay on Substack, in which I really like Lizzo, and not that that matters. She talked about how, she has been a symbol of body positivity, has recently lost weight, and has received pushback for that because, and I admit to this, I have felt this way in the past too about certain celebrities who have sort of represented to me the empowerment of not giving a crap and of being able to be successful and just exist in a body that isn't what the media endorses, without apology. And admittedly, that has been something that has been meaningful to me personally. And I'm still in a straight size body. I am at the upper end of straight size for full transparency. It's in about a size 12. But I have felt, even then, I have felt, like I have to apologize. I have also experienced life in a plus size body and absolutely felt like I had to apologize. So this does mean something to me. And this is part of the social justice piece of it, of understanding that you're starting off the back foot when you aren't small. So Lizzo talked about her experience of weight loss, and she actually reframed the term weight loss to release. She talked about the ways in which she had worked with a therapist and started to realize that some of the weight that she was holding on her body was more of a defense and more of a protective mechanism. She had an identity that got built around that, and that she felt that it was actually, she was outgrowing it and she didn't want to hold on to it anymore. And that it wasn't weight loss, it was like weight release, almost like shedding layers of our past self or things that we have carried. This is a tricky subject because we can start to look at weight release as if, because we might start to think, okay, well, then all fat must be a way of harboring something or a reflection of trauma that we have to let go of, or that it's always something that we should be releasing, or that the goal is to release it, which risks pathologizing fat itself, because not everybody who has fat on their bodies needs to release it. Like it's not a representation of pathology. And this conversation's going to lean there. And this is where, okay, this is what I want to talk about, because I'm of two minds on this. It's not of I'm two minds. It's two things are true. I do believe that sometimes people carry weight as protective. I do believe that. I have personally been there. I have done that. I have worked with clients who have originally gained weight in recovery and then subsequently lost weight after periods of time of just finding more and more alignment with their food, of feeling more safe in their bodies, and their weight has changed. There can be a way that we do release weight in a way that reflects more alignment with ourselves, with our food, with our movement. I think there is potentially some connection sometimes. And this is what Lizzo was speaking to. I'm not in disagreement with that. And I think that that's a personal experience. That isn't something that we're posting about or flaunting. I think it is the opposite of an ego-driven experience. It is something really, it's very personal, I think. And as such, it's very different from weight loss glamorization, right? Where we are like posting it, looking for the accolades. It is really a quiet experience as far as I'm concerned, in that it's not about chasing an aesthetic. However, I just know, I don't know how many people have read that essay, but if the culture gets its hands on weight release as opposed to weight loss, no matter how sincere Lizzo's description of it was, no matter how real that experience can be, it will be corrupted by the hands that start to hold it. Our culture has a nasty habit of taking helpful concepts and turning them into diet culture adjacent concepts. So we will start talking about weight release, and then it will become a way that people hide behind the diet culture driven, media aesthetic driven weight loss, like wellness, right? Wellness was something that, who's going to argue with wellness? Wellness with a lowercase w is fantastic. Like it's being well. But wellness got corrupted. Wellness became wellness with a capital W and a TM symbol, and is now just diet culture rebranded. Is there a way in which we can have wellness without wellness? Yes. But how many people are out there advocating for wellness when it's wellness? It has become its own beast. Even nervous system regulation, regulating the nervous system, once it got into mainstream conversation, became about how you could regulate your nervous system to lose weight, or how you had to eat a certain way to support your nervous system. If you lose weight from regulating your nervous system incidentally, or if eating certain foods helps you feel well, great. But by and large, that concept is getting completely overrun by the idea that we can hide behind that in order to present this morally superior way, when really it's all the same thing. We're just slapping a different word on it and we're hiding behind the language. But it brings up the question too of, Lizzo was obviously moving through her own personal evolution and experience in a way that was what I perceive as driven by her own work, right? Like her own self-investigation, or whatever she went through. I can't know what she went through, but I do believe that whatever she did wasn't necessarily driven by diet culture, at least not alone. And when the world comes down on you for that, what she was doing in this essay was advocating for, like, I know I was a symbol of safety for people in bigger bodies, and my personal evolution grew beyond that. Now we've got a conflict between, again, the individual and the symbol. I never believed that somebody would ever give up their individual experience for the sake of being a symbol. This is the body autonomy argument. She should do whatever makes her happy. Absolutely. She's not going to stop her own, like therapeutic growth for the sake of staying a symbol necessarily, right? Everybody's got a personal life. But when the culture reflects the disappointment in the symbolism disappearing, that is a different thing. And I think that for us to be able to say, Lizzo can do whatever Lizzo needs to do, and I am disappointed that symbolically we're losing an ally. These two things can be true at the same time without blaming Lizzo. I think that when we blame the celebrity for doing something, we're deflecting from the responsibility of the culture. I think we need to keep our eyes on the responsibility of the culture. That is the place where we need to be having these continued conversations. We need to be pointing the finger at the culture, and we need to not be escaping that area of accountability by imagining that an individual themselves can control that, or that they're the reason for the downfall of something. I think we really dilute the argument this way. And so, what do we do? What do we do here? So, I think that it is important for us to have conversations about our culture and about the systems that support what individuals are doing in our culture. I do not think not naming this is the answer. I think that even if we are naming this with individuals as representatives, right? Like to name a cultural conversation going on and to use that conversation to point out this is the example of how these oppressive systems are impacting us. This is the example of how the trickle down works from celebrity down to me at 6 years old looking at a magazine. We need to talk about it. We can't ignore it. And we certainly can't ignore it in the name of saying it's not right to talk about people's bodies or everybody has the right to do what they want to do. Absolutely. Both of these things are true. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a cultural phenomenon represented by individuals. I think that making this distinction about what it means to talk about an individual and naysay an individual or hold an individual responsible for things they're not responsible for themselves versus using those examples as a way of talking about what's happening, how the media is impacting us, and even just to make some of it conscious, right? Like to help young girls understand that what they see in the movies and on television and even on like YouTube channels and things, like they are exposed to so much of this. And the most popular influencers and the most popular YouTubers and the most popular celebrities are small, they're tiny. And I think it's important that we are explaining to our children why this is. To ignore that is, I think, irresponsible. I think that it's cutting off your nose to spite your face. Like, no, we need to be talking about it. We need to be naming this to our children because there isn't. And again, I will go back to this argument. Once there is equal representation, once there is a level playing field, then we don't have to talk about it anymore because all things are equal. Then there's nothing to explain. But when there is a bias, you can't not talk about that bias if you're being directly influenced by it. If you told me when I was 14 years old looking at Nikki Taylor at a time when I may have been able to ingest it, like, you don't need to look this way. If somebody had just mentioned to me, like, this is what's happening here, this is why these people make it to the magazines, the culture is this way, and so this sells, and so they sell it to you and they keep propagating it. If we're able to have some kind of context for understanding, oh, there's a whole system at play here, what I'm looking at is more than meets the eye. Maybe there's something, again, I don't think it does everything because things bypass consciousness and logic and reason. But maybe it would have helped me poke a little bit of a hole in what I was assuming was what is normal, what is average. I don't think that we are ever, at least not in this lifetime, going to move away from the relentless push towards excessive standards of beauty and thinness and youth. But I'd like to lay a groundwork for at least starting to try. And speaking about it is how we do that. I hope there's some points in here that we can think about and talk about in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week.